She's not even on the list, my father said, and he chuckled. The laugh wasn't loud, but it was sharp and very casual, like he was cutting a ribbon at some ceremony that didn't matter. I was standing just a few feet from the banquet entrance of the Navy Officers Club. One of my hands was still on my ID, and the other was gripping the handle of my uniform bag. Across the marble foyer, I could see my brother, Mark, dressed in his full mess whites, enjoying being the center of attention. And I was standing next to a security officer who had just confirmed it. "I'm sorry, ma'am, your name isn't on the guest list." It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a typo or a line missed on a spreadsheet. It was on purpose. The seating chart had been approved by my mother. The invite list was double-checked by my father, Captain Robert Miller, retired. And this evening, this large retirement party that was also a promotion party for my brother was being described as a Miller family military legacy event. And they still left me out. I didn't say a word. Not to the young officer who was awkwardly holding his tablet, not to my father, who had definitely heard what was said but was now pretending the punch bowl was the most interesting thing in the room, not to my mother, who looked at me once and then quickly turned away, like I was a problem that someone else would have to deal with. Mark saw it, of course. He always did. He smiled. Not in a mean way, but just smugly. It was the kind of smile you give a loser at the end of a game you always knew you would win. He turned to his wife and said something quietly. I didn't hear the words, but I heard her laugh float over to me. I just stood there in my beige trench coat with my civilian clothes on underneath. I hadn't planned to wear the uniform in. I was going to change quietly, show myself with a bit of grace, make a simple entrance. But grace only works in rooms where people are expecting it. Here I was invisible, and it was by design. The hall behind them was sparkling with white linens and navy blue banners. A slideshow of family photos was playing on a screen. I saw a picture of Mark in his academy uniform, standing proudly with my father. I knew that photo very well. I was in the background of the original, slightly out of focus, clapping. The crowd inside laughed again. Someone must have told a story about Dad's time on the USS Theodore Roosevelt, or maybe about Mark's recent commendation for a logistics exercise. A Navy legacy, that's what they called it. The Miller name carried on by Mark, the heir. I turned back to the young petty officer. His face looked apologetic, like he knew I shouldn't be out here, but also knew he couldn't do anything about it. "Ma'am, I'd have to call it in. I really can't let anyone who isn't on the list through, not tonight." He was just doing his job. So was I. I nodded, took a step back, and walked toward the side of the building, out of sight. I could have called someone. I had connections, rank, and authority. But what I needed right then wasn't to get in. It was clarity. This wasn't a mistake. It was an old memory repeating itself. It had always been this way. Family photos where I was literally cropped out. Holiday dinners where Mark got the main seat at the table, even before he was commissioned. Stories about service that always ended with, "Well, your brother is the real deal." My dad never yelled at me. He never hit me. He just dismissed me, quietly, consistently, and systematically. He once told a Navy friend of his, not realizing I was standing right behind the door, "Sarah's not like Mark. She's smart, but not a warfighter. She's more admin." That was the year I made lieutenant commander. Tonight was his moment. A full career in the Navy, 35 years, 4 deployments, a commanding officer on 3 different ships, enough medals to fill a whole wall. He deserved the party. What he didn't deserve was to rewrite history by erasing a part of it, because I had been serving too, quietly, steadily, and relentlessly, through secret sites and foreign ports, through war rooms and quiet midnight phone calls to prevent more casualties. But he never asked. He never wanted to know what I actually did, and I stopped offering to tell him, because offering your truth to people who have already decided to ignore it is just another way of being humiliated. I walked toward the back entrance, my hands steady, my uniform bag swinging at my side. My crisp whites were folded inside like a statement, just waiting to be revealed. "She's not even on the list." He laughed when he said it, like I was just some stranger trying to crash a party. But when I walked in wearing my full dress uniform with 2 stars shining on each shoulder, I knew what would happen. They would stand up. Not for me, but for what I represented. And that would be enough. We grew up in Coronado, California, where military life wasn't just common, it was treated as something special. Our street had more flags than it had mailboxes. Our neighbors were SEALs, pilots, and engineers. Every weekend, you could hear taps playing from the naval base across the water, and on the 4th of July, it seemed like the entire town was in uniform. My father, Captain Robert Miller, was a name people knew. Not because he wanted attention, that would have been against his nature, but because he led with that old-style, serious kind of discipline. Even when he was off duty, he carried himself like a man who had an important place to be, someone to report to. And Mark was born right into the story our father wanted to live. He was loud, bold, and athletic. He won every local sports trophy and gave every teacher a reason to see leadership potential in him. He talked like he was already in the military. He knew how to salute before he could even spell the word. I was the other one. I didn't cause any trouble. I didn't ask for much. I didn't cry when he forgot to come to my middle school awards night. I just stayed quiet. Books were easier to understand than people. Patterns made more sense to me than praise. I liked puzzles, codes, anything I could study quietly by myself and solve. When Mark got accepted to the Naval Academy, our backyard turned into a party. My father grilled huge steaks. Veterans and junior officers filled the lawn. Everyone toasted the next Miller to wear command gold. My mom brought out a big cake that said Future Admiral. I still remember the way Dad looked, standing next to him, his arm around Mark's shoulders like they had already won a war together. And me, I was handing out napkins. No one asked what I'd been working on. No one noticed that 3 days earlier, I'd won a national cyber defense competition held by DARPA. When I mentioned it at dinner, Dad stopped, nodded, and said, "That's nice, Sarah, but it's not a commission." He wasn't being cruel, just practical from his point of view. He understood rank, duty, and valor. What he didn't understand, or maybe didn't want to, was intelligence work, strategy, the quiet part of war that didn't involve helmets or ships. To him, I was just backup, a supporting role in the Miller family military story. So, when I applied to the Naval Academy, I did it without telling anyone. It wasn't an act of rebellion. I just didn't want to deal with the look on his face if I failed. When the letter came in the mail, I remember holding it in my hands for a full hour before I opened it. My palms were sweating so much that it left a damp mark on the envelope. I didn't tell anyone for 3 days. Then one evening, as Dad read the paper and Mark practiced tying knots on the porch, I stood in the doorway and said, I got in. He didn't look up. He just turned a page and said, "Let's not make a fuss." At the academy, I felt more at home than I ever had in my own house. Everything had structure, order, and a quiet sense of pride. No one cared that I didn't talk a lot. What mattered was how fast I learned, how well I did, and I did very well. I wasn't the strongest cadet physically, but I was in the top 3 for signals, intelligence, and war game simulations. I could outplan half the class without raising my voice. By the end of my second year, instructors were already marking my file with potential for the command intelligence track. Back home, none of that made it into the Christmas letter. That year, the update read, "Mark continues to excel in naval operations. Sarah is still working hard on her studies." Still working hard. I had just been awarded cadet commander of my unit, and my own father reduced it to just working hard. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone, but from being around people who only see an outline of you. My family saw a shadow. Mark became a surface warfare officer. My father showed up at his pinning ceremony with polished shoes and a camera. He gave a speech. They both cried. The base commander gave them a private toast. When I got my first Navy commission as an intelligence officer, I got a card in the mail with 5 words, "Proud of you, stay safe, Dad." I kept that card in my drawer for years, not because it meant a lot, but because it was the most direct praise I'd ever received from him. It would have been easy to get bitter, but I didn't. I got strategic. I stopped waiting for recognition. I stopped trying to make him proud. I focused on my work because my work didn't lie. My work saw me, measured me, and promoted me. I learned how to stay invisible until it was time to stand up. And tonight would be that time. They think I push paper. That's the running joke in my family if they even talk about me. They think I sit in a comfortable office, move forms around, review spreadsheets, and adjust reports written by real officers who are doing real things. It's easier for them to believe that because the truth doesn't fit into a holiday dinner conversation. The truth isn't family-friendly. It doesn't wear a lot of medals or show up in news headlines. The truth is quiet, classified, and lives in windowless rooms 4 stories underground. The truth is, I run a war no one talks about. After commissioning, I chose naval intelligence. Not because it was easy, but because it needed precision, quiet leadership, and deep thinking, and I was good at it. My first assignment was on the USS Winston S. Churchill as part of a tactical data team. They called me the Watchtower because I caught threats before they became active. I didn't shout, I didn't slam my fists on tables. I just asked questions no one else thought to ask. I was promoted to lieutenant, then lieutenant commander, then commander. All of them came ahead of schedule. Each time I called home, each time I got a short congratulations from my mother and a quiet phone from my father. Mark got headlines, I got clearance upgrades. By 37, I had a code name and a hallway in the Pentagon where only 7 other people in the building were allowed to go. They assigned me to a command structure so sensitive that our email addresses weren't visible in the defense directory. We operated in the Cell, a 24-hour black coordination unit for cyber warfare and geopolitical threat response. We weren't a think tank. We took action. Real-time, global, and deadly serious. Our job was to stop the next war before it started, without anyone knowing we did it. One night in 2020, I worked a 37-hour shift, tracking data packets moving through a Baltic satellite relay. It was subtle, just a few milliseconds of delay in GPS corrections. No one else caught it, but I did. Those delays were masking a state-sponsored signal spoofing attempt. If it had been successful, it would have redirected a destroyer group right into a minefield corridor. That destroyer was the USS Newport, Mark's ship. He never knew. None of them knew. They sent me a photo a week later of Mark smiling in front of the Newport's mast with a caption. "Our warrior," my mother added, "glad he's got the Lord watching over him." I almost replied, or maybe a little sister with a 10-person data team and 2 caffeine IVs. But I didn't, because this wasn't about proving anything to them. This was about doing the job. In 2022, I was moved to a subterranean command facility on the East Coast. Technically, it didn't exist. In practice, it ran more foreign operations than half the combined active fleet. I briefed admirals, advised NSA subcommittees, and oversaw real-time intercepts. They called me Admiral behind closed doors before the official star ever came. And the strange thing is, I didn't miss being seen. Until one day, I did. It was a Tuesday. I'd just gotten home from a double shift coordinating an urgent rescue op for a hostage team in Niger. We diverted an entire arm of a drone fleet to create a thermal distraction so our men could get out with 0 casualties. We succeeded. At 4:12 a.m., I took off my boots and sat in the dark with a cup of stale coffee and an ache behind my eyes that was deeper than just being tired. And then I saw it, a message from my mother in the family group chat. "So proud of Mark, another article. They're saying he might be up for Rear Admiral someday." My father replied, "He's earned it, one of the few still doing the work that matters." No one tagged me, no one asked how I was, no one knew that I already had 2 stars on my shoulder boards, waiting in my closet for the day the Navy made it public. They think I wear a skirt suit and answer phones. They think I manage reports. The reality is I manage silence, risk, and geopolitical storms before they become headlines. I made peace with the idea that no one will ever stand for me because if they do, it means I failed to keep something secret. Still, there was one thing that kept me grounded. One single commendation, signed in ink, hand-delivered by a 4-star. It read, "Commander Sarah Miller is personally responsible for the successful disarmament of a multinational threat with 0 loss of American life." It didn't come with a parade, but it came with purpose. The rank promotion to Rear Admiral came through late on a Wednesday. I sat alone in the briefing room when the message popped up. No cameras, no champagne, no hugs, just a text. Effective 0700, Rear Admiral S. Miller, by order of CCNA. I looked down at the silver stars in my desk drawer. I thought about calling home, but what would I say? "Hey, Dad, I just outranked your golden boy." That wasn't who I was. Not then, but maybe. Maybe I'm done being invisible. Not for ego, not for applause, but because if I don't stand in that room with my full rank, someone else will write the story. And I've spent my life letting them write it wrong. No more. The day of the Miller Family Legacy Gala, my father's retirement, and Mark's promotion was bright with spring sunlight and ceremony. They chose a grand location just outside. Norfolk, a military country club built like a monument to rank. It had marble steps, mahogany trim, and flags on either side of every doorway. It was the kind of place where uniforms weren't just worn, they were respected. It was invitation only, strictly military, the email had said. The irony was that I was the only Miller still on active duty who wasn't on the list. I got there 15 minutes early, dressed as a civilian in a tan trench coat over slacks and a black blouse. Nothing to draw attention, not yet. I went to the main gate and handed over my ID. The young petty officer checking the tablet was polite, almost too polite. He scanned the list, then scanned it again. His brow furrowed and his mouth thinned. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," he said, lowering his voice as if he were apologizing for bad weather. "You're not listed under the Miller family reservation. The confirmed guests are Captain Robert Miller, Mrs. Mary Miller, Commander Mark Miller, and family. That's it." He turned the tablet around as if to show me proof. I already knew. I thanked him anyway and stepped to the side, my heart beating steadily behind a calm expression I had practiced for years. I stood there, letting the moment sink in. The air smelled like freshly cut grass and leather polish. Officers and their families walked past in groups, their ribbons bright, their shoes shined, and their laughter rising. And then I saw them. The black SUV pulled up. Mark got out first, tall, handsome, and tan from his last assignment, wearing his mess whites like a movie star in a costume. My mother followed, her hands fluttering around her pearls. Then my father, with his strong chin and his chest out. Even in retirement, he still walked like he was inspecting a fleet. They saw me and stopped. Mark leaned toward his wife and smiling. "Probably a mix-up. She should have married a real officer." I heard it. So did the guard. My father didn't even look at me. He just put his hand on Mark's shoulder and guided him toward the entrance, like I wasn't even there. Like I never had been. That moment didn't hurt the way you might think. It didn't burn or sting. It didn't even shock me because I had been in this position before. I had stood outside family dinners, professional events, and life milestones, watching the story close in around Mark like a perfectly fitted uniform. But something changed that day. The silence around me, the careful, polite, suffocating silence, cracked. Something inside me stood up straight. Not this time. I turned and walked calmly toward the parking lot, past the valet. I unlocked the door to my government sedan and popped the trunk. Inside, there was a garment bag, secured and folded, marked with my name. Rear Admiral Sarah Miller. I took it out with both hands and laid it across the back seat, smoothing out the crease. No trembling, no anger. Just focus. Inside the venue, I had been told they were getting the slideshow ready. Miller family photos, Mark in combat, send Haas. Gear, my father on a ship's deck with his arms crossed. No pictures of me, of course. No evidence of my 22-year career. That was fine, because what I was about to show them wouldn't fit on a screen. It required standing up. I changed in the car, not in a rush, but deliberately, like it was a ritual. Dress whites, pressed perfectly. Every button closed with care, every insignia pinned exactly. The silver star sat on my shoulders, polished and gleaming. Rear Admiral, not acting, not honorary. Commissioned. Earned. I looked in the rearview mirror. A woman looked back, sharp, calm. I'd seen that face in classified briefings before combat deployments. But now, for the first time, it felt personal. I stepped back out into the sunlight. This time, the petty officer at the gate saw me before I even reached him. His eyes got wide. He stiffened up. "Ma'am," he said, already halfway to attention. I didn't realize." "You weren't supposed to," I said gently. I held up my ID again. He scanned it, and this time his scanner lit up green. There it was, a flag officer override. Full access, no questions asked. Behind him, I could already hear the opening remarks starting. A crowd settling, a microphone being tapped. Time was moving now, but I was calm. I didn't rush. I didn't fix my hair. I didn't even straighten my uniform. I just walked forward, past the security post, through the wide entrance of the club, down the hallway lined with service plaques and portraits of other men with stars. And with each step, I felt the weight of all that silence dissolve. Not because they let me in, but because I was done waiting for permission. The hallway to the staging room was empty, with thick carpet under my shoes. The wood-paneled walls were lined with framed citations and oil paintings of men in gold braid. Most of them were long dead. All of them looked like they belonged there. I wondered for a second how many women had walked this same hallway wearing 2 stars. Fewer than I could count on one hand. Maybe that's why I walked slowly, not because I was nervous, but out of respect for all the battles that had brought me here, some with foreign enemies and others much closer to home. The lounge behind the main stage was quiet and cold. A side door marked "Authorized Personnel Only" had been left slightly open. I stepped inside, took one breath, and locked it behind me. My eyes scanned the room. Leather chairs, a coat rack, a mirror, a small table with bottles of water, and neatly stacked ceremony programs. I sat down my uniform bag and unzipped it completely for the first time that day. Inside was my full-dress white uniform, gleaming, crisp, and immaculate. I laid it out on the table like it was a flag. And maybe, in a way, it was. It was the flag of who I really was. Not the version they joked about over Thanksgiving, not the afterthought at Christmas, but the real me. As I began to change, my mind went backward, not to the painful memories this time, but to the powerful ones. Operation Lion Wake, Somalia, 2018. A Navy SEAL recon team was trapped behind hostile lines. Their communications were jammed, and they had no way out. They had 24 hours until extraction, and I was the one who rerouted an entire surveillance satellite from a Russian theater to give them thermal coverage. The Joint Chiefs called it a miracle. We just called it Tuesday. I pinned the first star to my left shoulder board. Click. Operation Halberd, South China Sea, 2020. An unmarked cargo vessel was carrying radioactive material, and our data team flagged it. Within 12 hours, I had coordinated a joint interception with the Australians and MI6, neutralizing the threat and preventing a potential maritime incident that could have escalated into a full-blown crisis. Mark had no idea. No one in my family did. They were too busy writing another glowing family newsletter about his promotion to commander. Click. The second star went on my right. Operation Solstice Drift, classified. All I can say is that I stopped something terrible, and no one ever knew. I finished pinning the insignia. I turned to face the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't angry. She wasn't even cold. She was calm, complete. I hadn't dressed like this in public since the promotion. The Navy had kept the ceremony quiet in a private room. No cameras, no public record, just the flag, a small gathering of peers, and the steady voice of the admiral who read my citation. For sustained, meritorious service of the highest caliber in positions of global strategic command. No one in my family attended. They didn't even know it happened. I slipped on the white cover, adjusting the brim just above my brow. Then I sat for a moment, and I remembered Christmas 2 years ago. Mark had shown up late, still in uniform, and Dad made a toast to the Miller family warriors. Everyone clapped. I didn't. I had just gotten back from an emergency intelligence brief in Bahrain. I hadn't slept in 36 hours. My dress uniform was still hanging in the car. I hadn't worn it inside because I didn't want to upstage my brother. When I told Dad where I'd been, he nodded once and said, "Hope they didn't work you too hard at the office." I stood. No more shrinking. No more hiding behind beige trench coats or polite silence. I was walking into that ceremony not as a daughter, not as a sister, not even as a Miller. I was walking in as an admiral in the United States Navy. I opened the door to the hallway and stepped out. Music was playing. A string ensemble near the front of the banquet hall had begun a soft, instrumental version of Anchors Aweigh. The room was packed, maybe 300 officers, friends, and family, all facing forward, all waiting. I stood in the back, still unnoticed. Then a familiar voice came through the speaker system. "Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. We'd like to begin the formal portion of this evening's ceremony by welcoming the guest of honor, Captain Robert Miller." Applause erupted. My father rose from the table at the center of the room, smiling modestly as he walked toward the stage. My mother dabbed the corner of her eyes. Mark stood next, taking the podium. My father is a quiet man, but what he's done for this country and for this family speaks volumes. And tonight we honor the legacy he built and the future we continue. It was a nod to tradition, predictable, clean, then I heard it. And so, as we welcome my father to the stage, I ask all Miller family officers to join us in the front row. There was a pause, then someone whispered behind me, "Wait, there's another Miller." Time slowed down. I stepped forward. One step, then two. A ripple moved through the crowd. Heads started turning. Hands lowered their glasses. Murmurs began to build. They saw the white uniform first, then the stars. And then, like a wave breaking, it happened. The Navy SEALs rose first. Those who knew, who had read the briefings, who had seen my call sign in classified logs, who owed me their lives. And they shouted, not a cheer, not applause, but a formal military cry. Admiral Miller, front row! And 300 men stood. The sound of 300 Navy officers rising in unison is unlike anything else. It doesn't just rumble. It's a sharp, sudden sound. Chairs scraped backward across the polished floor. Metals clinked against ribbons. Quiet commands were given between ranks. Men who had spent years learning to move as one now stood together, arms at their sides, spines straight. Admiral Miller, front row. And just like that, the banquet transformed. All eyes turned from Mark, from my father, from the slideshows and the prepared remarks. They turned to me. Rear Admiral Sarah Miller. I didn't need to shout. I didn't even need to speak. I just walked. The first rows parted like the Red Sea. Someone whispered my name, but I kept my gaze steady, forward, controlled. This wasn't anger. This was an arrival. As I passed through the aisle, I felt the moment ripple outward. It wasn't just shock, it was recognition. Vice Admiral Torres, sitting 3 tables in, blinked and then nodded. Rear Admiral Voss actually rose to his feet again and saluted. I gave him a respectful incline of my head. Protocol didn't say anything about acknowledging a salute in this setting, but I wasn't here for protocol. I was here for the truth. My mother had both hands clutched against her chest. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. My father didn't move. His glass of water remained half raised, mid-toast, frozen between what he expected and what he was seeing. Mark, his expression was blank. Not embarrassment, not shame, just confusion. Like the math didn't add up, like someone had hacked his version of reality and swapped out the numbers. Sarah? He mouthed silently. At the front row, I took my seat. Not behind them, not next to them, but ahead of them. A junior officer approached, flushed and anxious, and handed me a printed program. Ma'am, we didn't know you'd be attending. Your name was never submitted. I finished calmly. Yes, I noticed. He blinked, nodded, and swallowed hard. We'll adjust the order of recognition. I nodded. Carry on. He hurried off like a man who knew he'd just handed a seating chart to someone with serious authority. Mark eventually returned to the mic. He tried to smile, tried to recover, but his voice faltered. Well, it seems our family legacy continues in ways I hadn't fully appreciated. There were soft, nervous chuckles. He gestured to me. Let's all give a warm round of applause to Rear Admiral Sarah Miller. Scattered claps followed, polite, uncertain. Not disrespectful, just confused. Because the narrative had changed, and no one had rehearsed this version. After the formalities ended and my father was honored with his flag and a glass case, the crowd broke into smaller groups. Drinks clinked, and hors d'oeuvres were passed. The low hum of chatter returned. I stood by the far window, sipping water, calm, alone. I didn't chase anyone, I didn't wait. But they came. First, Vice Admiral Torres. Admiral Miller, he said, offering his hand. It's an honor. We'd crossed paths only once before, a joint exercise over Iceland. I remembered him by how precisely he folded his briefing notes. Didn't expect you here, he said quietly. They're still catching up. I gave a small smile. So am I. Then came Commander Jansen, one of the SEALs from Operation Lion Wake. He said nothing at first, just nodded. Then he looked at me with a kind of gratitude that doesn't need to be translated. You got us home, he said finally. That was enough. Mark approached last, not right away, not with his usual confidence. He looked tired, deflated, like a man who had just found out he wasn't the main character after all. How long? He asked. 15 years, I said. He nodded slowly, his eyes scanning my uniform as if he was still unsure it wasn't part of some elaborate joke. You outrank me. It wasn't said with anger, just awe. I do, I replied. But that's not what matters. Then what does? I finished my water and set the glass down. What matters is how long you assumed I didn't. My father stood behind him, arms crossed, not stiff, not hostile, just quiet, watching. We held eye contact for the first time in years, no salute, no handshake. Just a slow, uncertain nod, like the beginning of a sentence. By the end of the evening, I was the last Miller standing in the hall. Literally. They'd all gone. My mother had kissed my cheek, brief, tight, tearful. My father had shaken my hand. My brother had said nothing more. But as I walked to the exit, the young petty officer at the front stood up sharply. Good evening, Admiral. I returned the gesture, stepped into the night air, and smiled. Not because I'd proven them wrong, but because I'd finally stopped trying. 6 months later, I visited my parents' house for the first time in years. It was quiet. A Sunday afternoon in Virginia Beach. The wind was brushing the porch like a whisper. The house hadn't changed much. Same creaky swing, same flag out front. But something inside was different. I stepped into the living room, and there, against the far wall, was the Miller family display cabinet. It was newly built, glass-fronted, made of dark cherry wood. My father stood beside it, polishing the glass. Not obsessively, not for show, just carefully, like it mattered. Inside, I saw the rows of decorations. His medals from Vietnam, Mark's Navy commendation, a folded flag from my grandfather's funeral. But in the center, at eye level, unmistakable, was my Distinguished Service Medal. Framed next to it was a photo I hadn't known existed. Me on stage in my full white uniform, shaking hands with Vice Admiral Torres. 2 stars were shining on each shoulder, and beneath that, a small brass plaque was engraved. Rear Admiral Sarah Miller, U.S. Navy Intelligence Command. Service beyond recognition, valor beyond applause. My father noticed me staring. He straightened up and cleared his throat. I thought it was time the cabinet told the whole story. It wasn't an apology, but it was something more valuable. It was acknowledgement. That evening over dinner, something had shifted. Mark talked about his new assignment in a different tone, less for show, more real. He asked me how my team handled chain-of-command disputes. I answered, and he listened. My mother asked if I'd ever consider teaching at the academy. They need women like you, she said gently. Smart ones. The kind who've actually seen the world. That used to be the kind of comment that stung. Now it felt like an opening. Later, Mark and I sat outside on the porch swing, the same one where he once tied knots as a kid while I read military history books in silence. We didn't talk at first, just watched the breeze play with the leaves. Then he turned to me. I'm sorry. The words were small but heavy. He shook his head. I said some things I shouldn't have. I made a lot of assumptions about what mattered in this family, about what counted. He looked away. And the truth is, I was scared. That surprised me. Scared? I asked. He nodded. Of being second. I let that sink in. I let the silence hold it without judgment. I didn't want to outshine you, I said. That's why I never wore the uniform around you, never brought up my work. He smiled faintly. Turns out the shine wasn't something I could stop. You earned it. He paused, then added quietly, You always did. We sat a little longer, and for the first time I felt it, not just peace, but equality. Not the ceremonial kind, not about medals or seats or handshakes, but real human-level respect. It felt fragile, like glass, but it was there. As I got up to leave, my father met me at the door. He didn't try to hug me, he didn't say anything grand, but he looked me in the eye, and this time he didn't look away. You make the Navy proud, Admiral, he said, a beat. And you made me proud, too. I just didn't know how to say it. I nodded once, not because I needed the words, but because they mattered more now that I didn't need them. Later that night, I stood in my apartment in D.C., looking at the stars outside the window. Real stars. not silver, not stitched onto a shoulder. I thought about all the years I'd spent chasing approval, chasing applause, chasing a place at the table. And now, I didn't need a chair anymore. I had a command. I had purpose. I had peace. Blood had built the Miller name, but I'd rebuilt the meaning with work no one saw, with silence no one praised, with service that asked for nothing and finally received everything.